London, 1857. For a woman who has just learned the Duke of Rothingham will not have her, you appear remarkably composed, Miss Cunningham. Penelope Cunningham's laughter rang clear across Lady Harwick's drawing-room, causing several matrons to turn with poorly disguised interest. She met Lady Harwick's stunned expression with a smile that revealed nothing of her true feelings. "My dear Lady Harwick, whoever gave you the impression I was awaiting a proposal from the Duke? I assure you his marital intentions, or lack thereof, are of no consequence to me." Lady Harwick's eyes narrowed. "The entire ton has witnessed your interactions this season. 5 dances at Lady Pembroke's ball, 2 private walks in Vauxhall Gardens, and he specifically requested your company at the Duchess of Marshfield's musical evening. One does not inspire such attentions from a man of his standing without expectations." Penelope adjusted her gloves, grateful for the years of practice that allowed her to maintain her composure while her chest tightened painfully. "The Duke and I share an appreciation for literature and conversation, nothing more. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe my aunt is signaling for my assistance." She made her escape with measured steps, her smile fixed firmly in place despite the whispers that followed. Only when she reached the relative privacy of the refreshment room did she allow her shoulders to drop slightly. 26 years of life had taught Penelope that appearances were everything, and displaying weakness was an invitation to ruin. "Convincing performance," came a low voice from behind her, though perhaps the laughter was a touch theatrical. Penelope turned to find her cousin and confidant, Lillian Montgomery, offering a glass of punch. "You heard," Penelope accepted the glass, taking a small sip to ease her dry throat. "Everyone heard. Lady Harwick possesses many qualities, but discretion is not among them." Lillian glanced around before continuing in a hushed tone. "Is it true, then, about the Duke? Apparently, he informed Lord Castleford last night that he has no intention of marrying this season. Or any season, for that matter." Penelope kept her voice even, refusing to acknowledge the ache in her chest. "The news has spread faster than influenza in winter." "Oh, Penny." Lillian's sympathetic expression was almost worse than Lady Harwick's malice. "I am so sorry." "Don't be. I never expected anything from him." The lie came easily after years of practice. "A woman in my position cannot afford such delusions." Lillian frowned. "Your position as the daughter of a respected physician." "My position as a woman without fortune, without connections, and with a scandal in her past," Penelope corrected. "The daughter of a respected physician who died leaving nothing but debts and a tarnished name. Let us not pretend society has forgotten. That was your father's mistake, not yours. Society rarely makes such distinctions." Penelope set down her untouched punch. "Now, shall we return before our absence is remarked upon? I've provided enough fodder for gossip today." As they rejoined the gathering, Penelope felt the weight of curious glances. 6 years had passed since her father's disgrace and death, yet the shadow of scandal lingered. Dr. Edward Cunningham, once respected physician to London's elite, had been discovered falsifying research and misdiagnosing patients to maintain his prestigious practice. The revelations had come too late for several patients who might have been saved with proper care. The scandal had destroyed everything: their home, their social standing, and finally her father himself, who suffered a fatal apoplexy upon seeing his name denounced in the medical journals. Penelope and her mother had been left with nothing but debts and shame. Her mother had not survived the fall from grace, dying of what polite society called a decline, but what Penelope recognized as a broken heart. At 20, Penelope had found herself alone, penniless, and bearing the weight of her father's sins. Only her mother's sister, Lady Agatha Whitmore, had offered assistance, providing Penelope with a home and reintroducing her to society. 6 years of impeccable behavior, charitable work, and careful humility had slowly rebuilt her reputation, though never to its former standing. And then Thomas Roe, the Duke of Rothingham, had entered her life, unsettling the careful existence she had constructed. Their first meeting at the British Museum had been entirely accidental. Penelope, serving as companion to her younger cousin, had become separated while examining the Elgin marbles. She had found herself instead in the Egyptian exhibition, standing before a glass case containing papyrus scrolls, when a deep voice had interrupted her contemplation. Remarkable, is it not, to think these words have survived thousands of years, yet we struggle to preserve our own correspondence for a decade. She had turned to find herself facing a tall gentleman with observant grey eyes and a serious expression that softened when he smiled. She had not immediately recognized him as the Duke of Rothingham. His lack of entourage and simple attire had disguised his rank, and had spoken freely on the subject of preservation techniques she had learned from her father. Only later, when her cousin had gasped and curtsied, addressing him by title, had Penelope realized her error. By then, it was too late. They had already engaged in a half-hour's earnest conversation about ancient civilizations, and the Duke had seemed genuinely interested in her opinions. That encounter had led to others, at lectures, in bookshops, at musical evenings. Each meeting reinforced the connection between them, an understanding that went beyond conventional society pleasantries. The Duke valued knowledge and sincerity above the usual accomplishments prized in young ladies, and Penelope found herself sharing thoughts she had long kept private. Foolishly, she had begun to hope, not for marriage, she knew her place too well for that, but perhaps for something. Recognition of their mutual regard, acknowledgement of their compatibility. Instead, she had Lady Harwick's smug revelation and the countless eyes now watching for her reaction, waiting for her composure to crack, for the confirmation that Penelope Cunningham had once again reached beyond her station and been found wanting. She would not give them that satisfaction. "Miss Cunningham," called Lady Agatha from across the room, "come meet Mrs. Lancaster. She is seeking a companion for her daughter's trip to Bath next month." Penelope recognized the summons for what it was, a reminder of her dependent status, and a signal that her aunt was already considering alternative arrangements. Lady Agatha had been generous, but her patience was not unlimited. If Penelope had truly harbored hopes regarding the Duke, her aunt would consider it time to redirect her ambitions toward more attainable prospects. Like serving as a paid companion to a girl half her age. "Of course, aunt," Penelope replied, moving across the room with perfect posture and a serene smile that belied the hollowness in her chest. For all her intelligence and education, Penelope had forgotten the most fundamental lesson. People like her did not capture the hearts of dukes. Love, she had learned early, was a luxury afforded to those with fortune or beauty or impeccable lineage, preferably all three. She possessed only her mind, her dignity, and the determination to survive. That would have to be enough. The Duke of Rothingham was not a man given to impulsive actions. At 32, Thomas had built his life upon careful consideration and rational decision-making, qualities that had served him well in managing his extensive estates and navigating the treacherous waters of Parliament, which made his current situation all the more confounding as he found himself riding through Hyde Park at an unseemly hour, hoping for a glimpse of a woman he had allegedly just rejected. "You look positively murderous this morning, Rothingham," remarked his companion, Lord Everett Sinclair. "I take it you've heard the rumours." "I have," Thomas's jaw tightened. "Apparently, I've declared my eternal bachelorhood to Castleford, who then announced it to all of London. Fascinating, considering I haven't spoken to Castleford in over a month." Ah, Everett's eyebrows rose. "And the part about Miss Cunningham is equally fabricated." Thomas adjusted his hat, scanning the path ahead. "Who is responsible for this particular piece of fiction?" "Lady Harwick, by all accounts. She made quite a spectacle of informing Miss Cunningham at yesterday's gathering." Everett hesitated. "They say Miss Cunningham laughed when told." Thomas frowned. "Laughed?" "Apparently so. Made it clear she had never entertained such expectations regarding your relationship." Everett studied his friend's reaction carefully. "Some are calling it admirably dignified. Others suggest it reveals a calculating nature." "Miss Cunningham is neither cold nor calculating," Thomas replied sharply. "She is merely intelligent enough to recognize absurdity when confronted with it." "Then you had not rejected her?" "There was nothing to reject. I have made no declarations, no promises." Thomas's frustration was evident in his clipped tone. We have enjoyed conversations on topics of mutual interest. Nothing more. 12 conversations in public gatherings, 3 chaperoned walks, and a private discussion in your aunt's library during her literary soiree, Everett corrected. Society counts these things, my friend. Thomas was saved from responding by the appearance of 2 riders ahead, one he recognized immediately as Penelope Cunningham, accompanied by a groom wearing Lady Agatha's livery. She sat her horse well, though the animal was clearly chosen for docility rather than spirit. Her riding habit was several seasons out of fashion, but impeccably maintained, like everything in her carefully managed existence. "Miss Cunningham," he called, urging his horse forward. "Good morning." She turned, surprise briefly crossing her features before she composed herself. "Your Grace, Lord Sinclair. I hope this fine weather finds you well." "Exceedingly well, though I find myself troubled by curious reports," Thomas replied, bringing his horse alongside hers. "May I accompany you for a moment? Lord Sinclair can entertain your groom with tales of his latest sporting triumph." Everett, understanding the dismissal, nodded and fell back to engage the servant, giving them a semblance of privacy. "I presume you've heard the rumors," Thomas said once they were relatively alone. "I believe all of London has heard them, Your Grace." Her voice was steady, her posture perfect as they rode side by side. "You needn't concern yourself. I've made it clear that your marital intentions, or lack thereof, are of no interest to me." "Have you indeed?" Thomas studied her profile. "I'm told you laughed at the very notion." A faint colour touched her cheeks. It seemed the most effective response to Lady Harwick's attempt at humiliation. Showing distress would only have confirmed her insinuations. And were they insinuations that required confirmation or denial? Penelope's hands tightened on her reins. "I have never presumed anything regarding our acquaintance, Your Grace. I am fully aware of the differences in our positions." "Are you?" Thomas challenged softly, "because I find myself increasingly unaware of them." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, with those clear, intelligent eyes that had first captured his attention. "You are the Duke of Rothingham. I am the daughter of a disgraced physician who died leaving nothing but debts and scandal. Society may tolerate our conversations on Egyptian artifacts or Wordsworth's poetry, but anything more would be deemed inappropriate. Surely you understand this." "What I understand," Thomas replied, "is that I have spent the last 3 months in the company of a woman whose mind challenges mine, whose character I respect, and whose presence I find increasingly essential. What others deem appropriate has never particularly concerned me." Penelope drew her horse to a halt, turning to face him fully. "You cannot mean that." "I rarely say things I do not mean, Miss Cunningham." "Then you are being reckless," she said, her voice lowered despite their relative privacy. "Your position demands consideration beyond personal preferences. You have responsibilities to your family name, to your estates, to your future heirs." "All of which I am acutely aware," Thomas agreed. "I have spent 12 years managing those responsibilities since inheriting the title. I have rebuilt estates that my father neglected, established schools on my properties, and represented our interests in Parliament. I have done everything required of me, except the one thing everyone expects: marry advantageously." "Exactly," Penelope said, a hint of desperation entering her voice. "You should marry advantageously. A woman with connections, with fortune, with—" "With what?" Thomas interrupted. "With a mind focused solely on fashion and gossip, with no understanding of estate management or political considerations. With no genuine interest in anything beyond her own social advancement. There are many accomplished women of suitable rank. None who quote Herodotus from memory or challenge my opinions on land reform." Thomas moved his horse closer. "None who volunteer at St. Bartholomew's Hospital despite the risks to their already precarious social standing." Penelope paled. "You know about that. I make it my business to know about matters that interest me. Your work there honors your father's profession, whatever his personal failings. You know about my father as well. It wasn't a question." "I do." Thomas's expression softened. "Just as I know that you have spent 6 years atoning for sins that were never yours." Penelope's composure finally faltered. Whatever your investigations have revealed, they cannot change facts. I have nothing to offer a man of your position. No dowry, no influential family, no unblemished name. You offer what I value most: integrity, intelligence, and the courage to rebuild your life from its foundations. Thomas hesitated, then added, and perhaps, if I am not mistaken, some measure of genuine regard for me beyond my title. Her eyes widened, vulnerability flashing across her face before she could conceal it. That is unfair, Your Grace. Thomas, he corrected gently, my name is Thomas. We cannot have this conversation, she insisted, gathering her reins. Not here, not now, not ever. Whatever you think you feel, it will pass. The rumors will fade if we simply avoid each other's company for a time. And if I don't wish to avoid your company, then you are courting scandal for no purpose. Penelope's voice trembled slightly. I will not be the cause of your social ruin. Why, Thomas? Before he could respond, she nudged her horse forward, signaling to her groom. Good day, Your Grace, Lord Sinclair. Thomas watched her ride away, her back straight, her head high, every inch the dignified woman he had come to admire. Beside him, Everett whistled softly. Well, that was illuminating, his friend remarked. I take it the rumors were indeed fabrications. Entirely, Thomas confirmed, his eyes still following Penelope's retreating figure. And yet she seems determined to believe them. She believes what society has taught her to believe, that she is unworthy of happiness because of circumstances beyond her control. Thomas turned to his friend with newfound resolution. A belief I intend to correct. Everett studied him carefully. You're serious about this, about her? Completely. The Tun will not approve. Thomas's expression hardened. The Tun's approval has never been my primary concern. No, Everett agreed with a smile, which is precisely why they respect you despite your unconventional views. But this will require more than your usual disregard for society's opinions. If you truly intend to pursue Miss Cunningham, you're facing an uphill battle. Fortunately, Thomas replied, I've always enjoyed a challenge. The invitation arrived 3 days later, embossed with the Rothingham crest. Penelope stared at it, heart racing as Lady Agatha broke the seal and read the contents aloud. The Duke of Rothingham requests the pleasure of Lady Agatha Whitmore and Miss Penelope Cunningham's company at Rothingham House for a private viewing of artifacts recently acquired from the excavations at Pompeii, followed by dinner. Wednesday next, 4 o'clock. Lady Agatha looked up with undisguised interest. Well, well, it seems the rumors of the Duke's disinterest were greatly exaggerated. It's merely a cultural invitation, Penelope said, though her hands trembled slightly. His Grace knows of my interest in archaeology. A private viewing, Penelope, not a public lecture or exhibition. Lady Agatha studied her niece thoughtfully. This is a deliberate statement of preference. Or perhaps just the courtesy of a gentleman who wishes to correct misconceptions. Penelope rose, needing to escape her aunt's keen gaze. Either way, we should reply promptly. Indeed we should, in the affirmative, of course. Lady Agatha folded the invitation carefully. And you'll need a new dress. That blue silk we've been saving for a special occasion will do nicely. Aunt, I don't think. For once, my dear, I suggest you don't think. Simply feel. Lady Agatha's expression softened. You've denied yourself happiness for too long, constantly paying for your father's mistakes. Perhaps it's time to consider that someone might value you for yourself, regardless of your circumstances. Penelope shook her head, unwilling to nurture hope that would only lead to disappointment. The Duke and I inhabit different worlds. Yet he seems determined to bridge that gap. Lady Agatha rang for her writing desk. At the very least, an evening admiring ancient treasures will be a pleasant diversion, will it not? Unable to argue with that logic, Penelope conceded. Yes, I suppose it will. She spent the week alternating between anticipation and anxiety, telling herself repeatedly that the invitation meant nothing beyond what it stated, a shared intellectual interest, perhaps accompanied by the Duke's sense of propriety in correcting false rumors. By Wednesday morning, she had nearly convinced herself of her own indifference, until she found herself standing in Rothingham House's magnificent entrance hall, her carefully cultivated composure threatening to desert her entirely. The house was everything a ducal residence should be: imposing, elegant, rich with history. Paintings of stern-faced ancestors lined the grand staircase, and priceless furniture gleamed with the patina of centuries. Yet there were unexpected touches that spoke of the current Duke's character: fresh flowers in contemporary arrangements, modern books mixed with ancient tomes on the library shelves visible through open doors, and display cases containing artifacts from around the world. Lady Agatha, Miss Cunningham. The Duke himself appeared to greet them, foregoing the usual formality of having his butler announce their arrival. "I'm delighted you could come." He looked different here in his ancestral home, more relaxed yet somehow more imposing, perfectly at ease in surroundings that matched his station. Penelope curtsied, acutely aware of the gap between his world and hers. "We were intrigued by your invitation, Your Grace," Lady Agatha replied. "Pompeii has captured the imagination of London society since the excavations began." "Indeed. Though I find the human stories more compelling than the architectural discoveries." Thomas's gaze rested on Penelope. "The artifacts speak to lives interrupted, hopes suspended in time." "A sobering thought," Penelope managed, meeting his eyes briefly. "That ordinary moments can be preserved for eternity." "Precisely," he offered his arm. "Shall we? I've had the collection arranged in the West Gallery." The next hour passed in a blur of ancient wonders: delicate glassware, household items, jewelry and artwork, preserved beneath the volcanic ash for centuries. Thomas proved a knowledgeable guide, explaining each piece with genuine enthusiasm rather than mere scholarly detachment. "This is extraordinary," Penelope said, examining a woman's gold bracelet. To think this adorned someone's wrist as she went about her day, never imagining it would outlast her by millennia. "It makes one consider what we might leave behind," Thomas agreed, standing close enough that she could detect the subtle scent of his cologne. "What artifacts might define us centuries hence?" "I doubt I shall leave anything so lasting," Penelope replied lightly. "Perhaps a few well-thumbed books." "You underestimate your impact," his voice lowered. "Some influences cannot be contained in display cases." Before she could respond to this unsettling statement, a footman appeared to announce dinner. Thomas offered his arm once more, leading them to a dining room that, while smaller than the main state dining hall, was still impeccably appointed. To Penelope's surprise, the table was set for just the three of them. "I hope you don't mind the informal arrangement," Thomas said, as he seated Lady Agatha at his right and Penelope at his left. "I find conversation flows more naturally in smaller gatherings." "Quite sensible," Lady Agatha approved. "Though I confess I expected to see your aunt, the Dowager Duchess. Is she not in residence?" "She's visiting my sister in Kent," Thomas replied smoothly, "though she sends her regards and hopes to make your acquaintance soon." The implication that there would be future occasions for such introductions hung in the air. Penelope focused on her soup, grateful for the years of practice that allowed her to maintain outward composure despite her inner turmoil. The meal progressed with pleasant conversation about literature, politics, and London society. Thomas proved attentive to both women, though Penelope couldn't help noticing how often his questions seemed designed to draw out her opinions specifically. It was during the dessert course that Lady Agatha made her move. "Your Grace, I find myself with a terrible headache developing. Would you think me terribly rude if I asked to rest briefly before our departure, perhaps in a quiet sitting room?" Thomas immediately expressed concern and rang for his housekeeper, who appeared with suspicious promptness. Penelope shot her aunt a questioning look, receiving only an innocent smile in return. "Miss Cunningham, perhaps you would care to see the library while your aunt recovers," Thomas suggested once Lady Agatha had been escorted away. "I've recently acquired several volumes on Egyptian hieroglyphics that might interest you." Penelope recognized the orchestration, but found herself unable to refuse. "That would be lovely, though I shouldn't like to keep my aunt waiting too long." Lady Agatha assured me she might need a full half-hour to recover, Thomas replied with a smile that suggested complete complicity with her aunt's machinations. "We have time." The library was magnificent, 2 stories of books with sliding ladders, comfortable reading areas, and large windows that would flood the space with natural light during daytime hours. Now, with evening approaching, footmen had lit the lamps and a fire burned in the massive fireplace, creating an atmosphere of intimate warmth. "This is wonderful," Penelope breathed, unable to hide her appreciation. "I could happily spend days here." "You would be welcome too," Thomas said quietly. She turned to find him watching her, his expression unguarded. "Your Grace." "Thomas," he corrected, "please. At least when we're alone." "We shouldn't be alone," Penelope replied, though she made no move toward the door. "This is precisely the situation I wish to avoid." "Why?" He moved closer, though still maintaining a respectful distance. "Because you fear what others might say, or because you fear what I might say?" "Both," she admitted, her composure finally beginning to crack. "Thomas, whatever you think exists between us cannot survive the realities of your position. A duke does not marry a penniless woman with a scandalous family history." "I believe a duke may marry whomever he chooses," Thomas countered, "particularly one whose estates are unentailed and whose fortune is entirely at his disposal. Society would never accept it. Society adapts remarkably quickly to the decisions of those with power and wealth." He took another step closer. "But more importantly, I find I care less about society's opinion with each passing day." "You say that now," Penelope argued, desperate to make him understand. "But what of 5 years hence, when the novelty has worn off and you face constant reminders of your misalliance? What of your children, who would bear the whispers of their mother's inadequate bloodline?" "My children would have a mother of intelligence, principle, and compassion," Thomas replied firmly. "Qualities far more valuable than an ancient name or a fortune." Penelope shook her head, unwilling to believe despite the longing in her heart. "You cannot know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Thomas closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Penelope Cunningham, from the moment you corrected my understanding of Egyptian funerary practices at the British Museum, I have been captivated by your mind. In the months since, I have come to admire your character, your resilience, and your quiet strength. You have rebuilt your life from ruins not of your making, and you have done so with dignity and grace." "Thomas," her voice faltered, "I had planned to court you properly," he continued, "to give you time to see that my interest was genuine. But these ridiculous rumors have forced my hand." His eyes held hers intently. "I will not have you believing for one moment that I could consider a future without you in it." "You cannot mean—" "I mean precisely this." Thomas drew a small box from his pocket and, to Penelope's shock, dropped to one knee before her. "Penelope Cunningham, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Not because of my title or your circumstances, but because I believe we could build a life of genuine happiness together." Penelope stared at him, at the open box containing a ring of sapphires and diamonds, at this powerful man kneeling before her as though she were the one with everything to offer. Tears filled her eyes, the careful walls she had built around her heart beginning to crumble. "People will talk," she whispered, her final defense. Thomas smiled. "People always talk. The question is whether we will listen or whether we will write our own story." In that moment, looking into his eyes, Penelope made her choice. 6 years of living according to society's judgment had brought her nothing but lonely dignity. Perhaps it was time, as her aunt had suggested, to simply feel. "Yes," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Yes, Thomas, I will marry you." His smile was brilliant as he rose, sliding the ring onto her finger before drawing her into his arms. His lips met hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened, conveying years of loneliness and the promise of a future neither had dared imagine. When they finally parted, both breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I hope you realize that Lady Harwick will be apoplectic when she hears of this." A laugh bubbled up from Penelope's chest, genuine and unrestrained. "Perhaps we should send her a personal note of thanks for spreading those rumors. Without her interference, you might have continued your cautious courtship for months." "A valid point," Thomas grinned, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Though I suspect your aunt deserves equal credit for her timely headache." "Oh, most definitely." Penelope smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. She'll be insufferably pleased with herself. As well she should be. Thomas kissed her again briefly. Though not half as pleased as I am. A discreet knock at the library door interrupted them, and Thomas called for the visitor to enter. Lady Agatha appeared, looking remarkably recovered from her supposed headache. "I trust your rest was restorative, Lady Agatha?" Thomas inquired with poorly concealed amusement. "Exceedingly," she replied, her gaze immediately falling to her niece's hand, where the sapphire ring glittered. "And I see my timing is impeccable as always." Penelope laughed, unable to maintain any pretense. "Aunt, you are incorrigible." "I prefer strategically minded," Lady Agatha corrected, her eyes soft with genuine happiness. "Well, your grace, shall I assume my niece has accepted your proposal?" "She has done me that great honor," Thomas confirmed, his hand finding Penelope's. "With your blessing, I hope." "You have had my blessing since you first sought information about her volunteer work at St. Bartholomew's," Lady Agatha replied. "A man who investigates a woman's character rather than her connections is a man of discernment." Penelope looked between them in surprise. "You knew of his intentions?" "I suspected," her aunt corrected. "The Duke made several discreet inquiries about your preferences and habits, not the actions of a man seeking mere friendship." "I believe in thorough research," Thomas explained with a smile. "And your aunt proved an invaluable source of information." "Conspirators, both of you," Penelope accused, though she couldn't summon any real indignation. "For a worthy cause," Lady Agatha insisted. "Now shall we discuss the announcement? I suggest we act quickly before Lady Harwick can spread any further misinformation." The announcement of the engagement between Thomas Roe, Duke of Rothingham, and Miss Penelope Cunningham appeared in the morning papers 2 days later, causing a sensation throughout London society. Speculation ran rampant. Some suggested a compromising situation must have forced the Duke's hand. Others whispered about secret fortunes or political machinations. Lady Harwick, upon reading the news, reportedly spilled her morning chocolate all over her new Parisian day dress. For Penelope, the weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The Dowager Duchess returned from Kent immediately, proving herself a staunch ally despite initial surprise at her son's choice. Letters of congratulation arrived alongside thinly veiled expressions of shock or disapproval. Former acquaintances who had distanced themselves after her father's disgrace suddenly rediscovered their friendship, while invitations poured in from those eager to associate with the future Duchess. Through it all, Thomas remained her anchor, steadfast in his choice and protective without being stifling. He insisted on a short engagement. "I've waited long enough to make you my wife," and Penelope found herself grateful for his decisiveness as it limited the time for society's speculation. The wedding took place 6 weeks after the announcement, at St. George's in Hanover Square. The church was filled with the cream of society, their presence a testament to the Duke's standing rather than any genuine goodwill toward the bride. Yet as Penelope walked down the aisle on her cousin's husband's arm, her eyes fixed on Thomas waiting at the altar, she found the courage to ignore the whispers and focus on the truth of their connection. "You look magnificent," Thomas whispered as she reached him, his eyes reflecting a depth of feeling that silenced any lingering doubts. "As do you," she replied, drawing strength from his presence. The ceremony passed in a blur, but Penelope would forever remember the moment they were pronounced husband and wife, the moment her life transformed completely. As they turned to face the congregation, now the Duke and Duchess of Rothingham, she caught sight of Lady Harwick's sour expression and couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. The wedding breakfast at Rothingham House was a lavish affair, though Penelope found herself too overwhelmed to eat more than a few bites. She moved through the crowd of well-wishers with newfound confidence, Thomas never far from her side. "You're doing beautifully," he murmured during a brief moment alone, "though I cannot wait for all these people to leave." Penelope felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Nor can I." "I wasn't referring to that," Thomas said with a laugh, though his eyes darkened momentarily. "Or not only that, I meant that I am eager for our real life to begin, just the two of us, making our own decisions without an audience." An audience seems to be part of the package when one marries a duke, she teased. True, but we needn't give them the satisfaction of our constant attention. He glanced around at the crowded room. What would you say to departing for Rothingham Park tomorrow rather than waiting the customary week? We could have the estate to ourselves before the summer house party season begins. I would say that sounds perfect, Penelope replied honestly. And so it was that the Duke and Duchess of Rothingham scandalized society once more by departing London a mere day after their wedding, foregoing the expected round of social appearances in favour of privacy at the Duke's principal country estate. At Rothingham Park, Penelope discovered a new version of herself emerging, one unburdened by constant vigilance against judgment or ridicule. Thomas encouraged her intellectual pursuits, established a hospital on the estate where she could put her medical knowledge to use, and treated her as a true partner in all decisions regarding their household and tenants. In their private moments, she found passion she had never allowed herself to imagine, a physical expression of the deep connection they shared. Thomas proved as attentive and considerate in the bedchamber as he was in all other aspects of their relationship, guiding her with patience through her initial shyness to a place of mutual pleasure and intimacy. "Are you happy?" he asked one evening as they lay together, watching the sunset from their bedroom window. 3 months had passed since their wedding, and they were preparing to return to London for the autumn session of Parliament. Penelope turned in his arms, studying the face that had become as familiar to her as her own. "Immeasurably so, are you?" "More than I ever believed possible." His hand caressed her cheek. "Though I admit to some anxiety about our return to town, the gossips will be waiting." "Let them wait," Penelope replied with newfound serenity. "Their opinions matter far less than they once did." Thomas smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "My brave Duchess." "Not brave," she corrected. "Simply loved enough to recognize my own worth." And that, Penelope realized, was the greatest gift Thomas had given her, not his name or his wealth or his protection, but the space to rediscover her own value. The girl who had laughed at Lady Harwick's cruel revelation had been defending herself against pain. The woman who now prepared to face London as the Duchess of Rothingham had no need for such defences. 6 months later, when they announced the impending arrival of the future heir to the Rothingham title, society's remaining whispers faded to nothing. By the time their son was born, a healthy boy with his father's grey eyes and his mother's curious nature, even Lady Harwick had been forced to acknowledge that the Duke's unconventional choice had proven surprisingly successful. "She actually congratulated me today," Penelope told Thomas as they sat together in the nursery, watching their sleeping infant, with almost convincing sincerity. Thomas laughed softly. "Proof that miracles do indeed occur." "Or proof that even society's strictest arbiters can be worn down by persistent happiness," Penelope suggested. "We've been married over a year, and still no tragic revelations or scandalous regrets." "How disappointing for them." Thomas took her hand, running his thumb over the sapphire ring that now kept company with her wedding band. "And how very satisfying for us." Penelope leaned against his shoulder, contentment warming her from within. "Do you remember what you said in the library when you proposed? About writing our own story?" "I do. I think we've made a good beginning," she said, watching their son's peaceful slumber, though perhaps not the one anyone expected. "Including us," Thomas acknowledged. "But I find I prefer our unconventional narrative to any predetermined plot society might have written for us." Penelope smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a chance meeting at a museum to creating a family together. Society had taught her that love was not for women like her, that her father's sins had defined her future. Thomas had shown her a different truth, that love, when genuine, could overcome even the most entrenched beliefs. "As do I," she agreed softly, "as do I."